Well, they've done it again. The British media has officially entered another episode of what can only be described as the Harry Panic Hour, where one casual sentence from Prince Harry somehow becomes front-page material, endless panel discussions, opinion columns, and enough pearl clutching to empty every jewelry box in Buckingham Palace. This time, the supposed scandal is that Prince Harry referred to himself as Prince of England during a relaxed podcast conversation. 3 words, 3 completely ordinary words spoken during an informal introduction have apparently shaken parts of the British media to their very core. If you only read the headlines, you would think Harry had marched into Parliament, rewritten constitutional law, printed himself a new passport, and declared himself ruler of the entire island. But if you actually listen to the conversation, the reality is remarkably different. And that is exactly why today's story deserves attention. Not because Harry said something outrageous, but because the reaction tells us far more about the British media than it does about Prince Harry. Because once again, context became the first casualty. Let's start with what actually happened. Harry appeared on Joe Marler's podcast in what was clearly designed to be an informal, humorous conversation. There was no palace briefing, no constitutional discussion, no debate about royal titles, no attempt to redefine his position within the royal family. Instead, the host simply asked Harry about himself in the sort of relaxed way millions of podcast listeners hear every week. Harry described himself in several different ways. He talked about being a father. He mentioned his military service. He referred to being a duke. And during that exchange, he also used the phrase Prince of England. That was it. The conversation moved on almost immediately. No dramatic music, no shocked silence, no declaration, no grand announcement, just people talking. Yet somehow, by the time sections of the British press got hold of it, those few seconds had become today's royal controversy. It's almost impressive. If exaggeration were an Olympic sport, some of these headlines would be standing on the podium collecting gold medals. Because that's how this cycle works. Take a harmless comment, remove the surrounding context, present it as shocking, invite commentators to express outrage, watch social media argue for 2 days, then repeat the process next week. The formula practically writes itself. One of the most fascinating things about this story is what it reveals about selective attention. Harry spoke for much longer than those 3 words. He discussed his work, his experiences, his life, his values, his family, his military background. Yet somehow, nearly all of that disappeared from certain headlines. Why? Because ordinary conversations don't generate outrage. Context doesn't generate outrage. Balance doesn't generate outrage. But isolated phrases? Those are gold, especially when the subject is Prince Harry. There seems to be an entire industry dedicated to turning perfectly normal moments into royal earthquakes. And every single time, we're expected to believe this latest incident is somehow the biggest scandal yet, only for another one to appear 3 days later. Let's think about this logically. Harry has been a prince since the day he was born. That isn't controversial. That isn't opinion. That is simply factual. His title as Prince Henry has existed his entire life. His dukedom is also factual. His military service is factual. His role as a father is factual. During a casual introduction, people often list different parts of who they are. I'm a teacher. I'm a mother. I'm from London. I'm an engineer. I'm a veteran. People don't stop to think about official wording every time they introduce themselves on a podcast. Human beings speak naturally. Apparently, however, Harry is expected to speak as though every sentence has first been reviewed by constitutional lawyers, 3 palace historians, and someone armed with a 400-page style guide. It's a standard that seems uniquely reserved for him. Because when other royals misspeak, it's called being human. When Harry says something slightly unconventional, suddenly we're discussing constitutional implications. It's quite the transformation. Another thing worth noticing is how quickly commentators assign motives. They don't simply report what Harry said. Instead, they immediately leap to conclusions. He meant this. He intended that. This is a message. He's sending signals. This proves... Does it? Or is it possible, just possible, that someone speaking casually on a podcast was simply speaking casually on a podcast? Sometimes the simplest explanation really is the correct one. Not every sentence contains hidden symbolism. Not every phrase is part of some elaborate strategy. Sometimes people are simply having conversations, an idea that seems increasingly difficult for sections of the royal press to accept, because mystery sells, conflict sells, outrage sells. Normality? Not so much. This also fits a broader pattern we've watched unfold for years. Harry attends a charity event, the headline becomes about family drama. Harry gives a speech about veterans, the headline becomes about palace tensions. Harry speaks about mental health, someone asks what he really meant. Harry laughs during an interview, suddenly commentators begin analyzing the smile. You almost have to admire the commitment. Imagine dedicating an entire news cycle to decoding facial expressions. Sherlock Holmes solved murders with less analysis than some royal commentators devote to Harry ordering coffee. At a certain point, it becomes less about journalism and more about performance, because outrage has become entertainment, and Harry remains one of its most reliable sources of material, not because of what he actually does, but because of how it gets framed. Meanwhile, millions of ordinary viewers watched the same clip and simply saw a relaxed conversation. No constitutional crisis, no royal rebellion, no declaration of independence. Just Prince Harry talking. Funny how different reality looks when you actually watch it instead of reading a headline. Now, here's the question that keeps coming back every single time a story like this appears. Who actually benefits from turning a casual podcast introduction into a national debate? Because it certainly isn't the audience. The audience deserves context. The audience deserves to know that Harry wasn't delivering a formal speech. He wasn't issuing a statement through Buckingham Palace. He wasn't attempting to redefine his titles or challenge constitutional conventions. He was sitting in a relaxed podcast environment, talking naturally, joking with the host, and describing different aspects of his life. Yet somehow, that ordinary moment was stripped of its context and repackaged into another headline designed to provoke outrage. And after watching this cycle repeat for years, it's difficult not to notice the formula. Take one sentence, remove everything before it, remove everything after it, write the most dramatic headline possible, invite commentators to speculate about Harry's motives, fill television panels with endless debates about what he really meant, then wait for social media to explode. The business model practically runs itself. The strange part is that many of these commentators insist Harry is no longer relevant. They say he's finished. They say nobody cares. They argue that the public has moved on. Then they spend an entire day discussing 3 words from a podcast. That contradiction deserves a moment of appreciation. Imagine insisting your favorite football club is irrelevant while watching every single one of their matches, memorizing every press conference, and writing 3 opinion pieces after every interview. Eventually, someone is going to ask a reasonable question. If nobody cares, why are you covering him every single day? The answer is obvious. Because people click. Harry generates attention. Whether people support him or criticize him, they watch, they read, they comment, they debate. Media organizations understand something very simple. Prince Harry remains one of the biggest royal stories in the world, not because someone declared it, because the audience keeps proving it. That reality is reflected again and again. Think about how often Harry makes headlines for doing completely ordinary things. He visits veterans. Headline. He attends the Invictus Games. Headline. He gives a speech. Headline. He laughs during an interview. Headline. Now, apparently, he introduces himself. Headline: At this rate, if Harry orders a sandwich, somewhere a columnist will write, "Royal experts decode the hidden meaning behind his choice of bread." And somebody will probably claim the mayonnaise was a direct message to Buckingham Palace. It would be ridiculous if it weren't so predictable. What often gets lost in these discussions is the actual substance of Harry's public work. This particular podcast wasn't about palace intrigue. It wasn't centered on family disputes. It wasn't an interview dedicated to attacking the monarchy. Instead, Harry spoke about experiences that have shaped his life. He discussed military service. He reflected on resilience. He talked about fatherhood. He joked with the host. It sounded like two people having a conversation rather than staging a constitutional summit. Yet, somehow, much of that disappeared from certain headlines because controversy attracts more attention than nuance ever will. That is one of the biggest challenges facing modern journalism. Nuance rarely trends. Context rarely goes viral. Balanced reporting rarely dominates the algorithm. Outrage does. Conflict does. Polarization does. And when the subject is Prince Harry, the temptation to maximize drama becomes even stronger. There's another interesting aspect to this story. Some critics argue that Harry shouldn't describe himself as a prince because he stepped back from working royal duties. But stepping back from working royal duties and being born a prince are two completely different things. Working status changes, birth does not. Harry remains Prince Harry. His formal peerage remains the Duke of Sussex. Those are objective facts, regardless of anyone's personal opinion about him. People are free to dislike him. They're free to criticize his interviews. They're free to disagree with decisions he has made. That's all part of healthy public debate. But facts remain facts. Confusing constitutional reality with personal frustration doesn't suddenly rewrite history. Another thing that stands out is how differently similar situations are often treated depending on who is speaking. When one royal makes an offhand remark, commentators frequently describe it as refreshing, human, authentic, relatable. When Harry speaks casually, the microscope comes out. Every adjective is analyzed. Every pause becomes symbolic. Every joke is examined for hidden intent. Imagine living with that level of scrutiny. Most of us struggle enough trying to send a text message without autocorrect inventing an international incident. Harry says one informal phrase on a podcast, and suddenly experts are debating constitutional symbolism before the episode has even finished. That isn't ordinary coverage. That's obsession. It also raises another important point. If the goal of some commentators is truly to encourage Harry to fade from public attention, they're pursuing a fascinating strategy because every headline keeps him firmly in the spotlight. Every television segment reminds audiences that he's still active. Every article sends readers searching for the original interview. Ironically, many of Harry's critics become his most consistent promoters. They amplify every appearance. They circulate every clip. They ensure millions of people hear what he said. It's one of the more entertaining paradoxes of modern media. People complain about Harry receiving attention while personally contributing to nearly all of it. Then there is the audience itself. One encouraging development over the past few years is that viewers are becoming much better at recognizing sensational framing. People increasingly watch the original interview instead of relying solely on headlines. They compare clips. They seek context. They ask what was actually said rather than accepting someone else's interpretation. That shift matters. It encourages better journalism. It rewards transparency. Most importantly, it reminds everyone that headlines are not always complete summaries of reality. Sometimes they highlight one sentence while overlooking the 99% of the conversation that provides meaning. This story feels like another example of exactly that, because if someone genuinely watched the podcast from beginning to end, it's difficult to conclude that Harry's primary objective was announcing himself as the Prince of England. That simply wasn't the focus of the discussion. The focus was conversation, humor, experience, life. The title became controversial only after it was isolated from everything around it. That distinction matters. Whether you support Harry or disagree with him, context should matter, fairness should matter, accuracy should matter. Those principles shouldn't depend on whether someone is popular with a particular newspaper. They should apply equally to everyone. For the rest of us, perhaps the better approach is much simpler. Watch the full interview, consider the context, and make up your own mind. That has always been a stronger foundation than relying on the loudest headline of the day. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.